The sky turned red over the desert planet of Zarion as the first wave of attack ships pierced the atmosphere. No one expected Earth's colonies to be involved in this far-off war. But when the signal came through the fleet command, orders were clear: send reinforcements even if it meant risking everything. Captain Darren Cole had never heard of the Zalari Empire before this mission. He was a ground soldier, trained in survival and tactics, not politics. But now he found himself aboard a dropship, heading straight into hostile territory. His orders were to land, secure a safe zone, and report back. Nothing about this mission felt normal. The planet's surface was cold, blue, and quiet. Darren's boots crunched against frost-covered stone as he moved through the broken ruins of what used to be an outpost. His team was gone. The comms were dead. No enemies in sight. He was alone, and then he heard it, a soft voice singing from inside the temple ruins. The sound was too calm, too human, and far too dangerous. Darren raised his weapon, heart racing, and stepped forward. Each footfall echoed like thunder in the silence. Inside the temple, glowing crystals lit the dark halls. At the center of the chamber sat a throne. Upon it lounged a figure with blue skin, silver-white hair, and piercing violet eyes. She looked like a goddess, but her armor was forged for war. Her smile was cold and full of power. "You are not from here," she said without fear. Her voice was deep, calm, and laced with command. Darren held his weapon steady, unsure if she was real or some trap. The figure rose from the throne slowly, each step measured like a queen approaching her captive. "I am Queen Saraxa of the Zalari Empire," she continued. "And you, human, are my prisoner now." Darren didn't blink. He had heard threats before, but something about the way she looked at him made him feel stripped of control. She wasn't just another warlord. She was something else. Two guards appeared from the shadows behind him. Before he could act, a bright blue light shot from the throne, locking his limbs in place. His muscles froze, his vision dimmed. The last thing he saw was the queen's smirk as she approached him, chains glowing in her hands. He was captured not by force, but by design. A perfect trap, one he didn't see coming. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was now something worse: a slave. Darren woke to the sound of humming crystals and the feel of cold metal around his wrists. He was lying on a raised platform, inside what looked like a ceremonial hall. The air was scented with burning oils, thick and sweet. Alien runes pulsed with soft blue light on the walls around him. He sat up slowly, the chains clinking as he moved. His body felt weak, but not broken. They hadn't hurt him. In fact, someone had cleaned his wounds and dressed him in loose, soft robes. It confused him more than any beating would have. He was a prisoner, but he was being treated like a guest, or something else entirely. The door opened with a smooth hiss, and Queen Saraxa entered. Her eyes scanned him like he was a puzzle. She wore a different outfit now, dark royal robes mixed with armor at the shoulders. A crown of glowing thorns rested on her head. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You are stronger than the others," she said. The last prisoner screamed. "You stayed calm." Darren stared at her without answering. Her presence was heavy, but he didn't flinch. He wouldn't let her see fear. That was rule 1. "You've been sentenced," she added, circling him slowly. "Not to death. That would be too easy. Your punishment is servitude. You will serve at my side until I grow bored of you." Her smile was sharp, but her tone was playful. Darren clenched his jaw and stayed silent. She stopped in front of him, reaching out with one glowing hand. Her fingers brushed his cheek, not in cruelty, but almost with curiosity. "You interest me, human," she whispered. "Perhaps I will keep you longer than I thought." Darren's skin burned where she touched him, but he didn't move. After she left, 2 guards entered. One handed him a strange device. It hummed in his hand and projected a map of the palace. The other spoke in broken English. "You follow orders. You stay alive. Maybe Queen like you more." Then they left him alone again. Time passed differently inside the palace. Each room felt alive with energy. He was given food, water, and a room. But always watched. He wasn't free. He wasn't even treated like a prisoner anymore. He was a possession. Something rare. Something dangerous to touch. Other prisoners looked at him with pity or jealousy. He heard whispers in alien tongues, saw the fear in their eyes. Queen Syraxa didn't treat anyone else this way. Darren was not sure if that made things better or worse. The walls felt like they were closing in. That night, the queen summoned him again. This time, he stood before her throne without chains. She looked at him, then at the guards, and gave a single wave. They all left. Darren and Syraxa were alone. "Do you know why I spared you?" she asked. Darren didn't answer. She stepped down from her throne, her steps slow and smooth. "Because you didn't break. That makes you valuable and dangerous." Her eyes locked onto his, searching for weakness. She found none. "You are mine now," she whispered. "But not for long if you displease me." Her words were like a challenge. Darren felt something shift inside him. He wasn't going to play the slave. If she wanted to test him, he would respond, in kind. He took one step forward, breaking every rule of her court. He looked her in the eyes and said calmly, "Then don't bore me." Her eyes widened just a little, enough for him to know the game had begun. The queen had power, but now so did he. Queen Syraxa sat in silence after his bold reply. No slave had ever spoken to her that way. Not even her generals dared to use such tone. Yet this human stood before her, eyes steady, voice calm, not asking for mercy but offering defiance. She should have ordered his execution. That would have restored control. But instead, she laughed. A soft, chilling sound that echoed across the chamber. She didn't know whether she admired him or hated him more in that moment. All she knew was this game had just begun. "You walk a dangerous path," she said, as she circled him again. Her steps were smooth, and her robe flowed like liquid shadow across the crystal floor. Darren followed her movement unshaken, like a wolf watching another predator. "Do not mistake interest for affection," she warned. "I enjoy strength, but I will not be challenged in my own court." Her eyes narrowed as she stopped behind him. Her voice dropped lower. "You are mine. Your rebellion only excites me further." She placed her hand on his shoulder before walking away. That night, Darren's quarters were moved closer to the throne room, a sign that his place had changed. He was no longer among the lower servants, but he wasn't honored either. He was something in between, something watched, something unpredictable. Inside his new chamber, Darren found weapons on display, not functional, but ceremonial. He examined one, an old blade of Zalari origin. Its edges were dull, but its design told stories. He had read about the Zalari once. They respected strength, but they bowed only to those who could break them. Darren began training again, using the open space in his room. He practiced in silence, every move sharp and focused. The walls had eyes, but he didn't care. If they watched, let them see what he was becoming. He would not remain powerless in a palace of enemies. Word spread quickly. Servants whispered. Guards avoided eye contact. Even the high advisor paused longer when passing Darren in the hall. They could feel the shift. The queen's toy was becoming something more, something dangerous, something real. During a royal gathering, Syraxa summoned him again. The hall was filled with nobles and warlords. Darren entered wearing clean robes, no chains. Murmurs filled the room as he approached the queen without bowing. She noticed. Everyone noticed. "Do you forget your place?" she asked, voice sharp yet curious. Darren gave a small grin and replied calmly, "You brought me here. If I have no place, then you created that." Gasps echoed. One guard reached for his weapon. The queen raised her hand and stopped him. The room waited for her reply. Syraxa stood, her eyes glowing brighter than before. "You test the limits," she said, "but you do it with style." She turned her back to the court and walked away, speaking, loud enough for all to hear. "Let him walk beside me tonight as a guest, not a slave. Whispers followed her command like a storm. As they walked side by side through the palace garden, neither spoke at first. The stars above were twin moons tonight, casting a blue glow on the path. Darren broke the silence first. You act like a ruler, but you crave something more. Control isn't enough for you. She stopped walking and looked at him with fire in her eyes. You think you understand me? She asked. Darren nodded once and replied, I understand people who pretend not to be lonely. The queen didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. For the first time Saraxa felt uncertain, and that feeling thrilled her. The next morning, the royal court was buzzing with rumors. No one could understand why the queen allowed a human to walk beside her. Some said it was a test. Others believed it was a warning. But none could deny that something had changed in the air. Darren stood at the edge of the training yard watching Zalari warriors drill in formation. Their weapons danced with precision, their movements like waves. He watched and learned. He was not part of them, but he was not beneath them either. Not anymore. Queen Saraxa watched him from the balcony above. She had ordered this session to test his focus. She wanted to see how far he could go without orders. But what she saw surprised her. He didn't just watch. He memorized. His eyes tracked every motion with the patience of a strategist. After the drills ended, she summoned him. He walked into her chamber without hesitation. She turned away from the window and faced him directly. You learn fast, she said. Faster than most of my officers. Darren didn't respond. He knew she wasn't finished. She stepped closer. Her armor shimmered in the low light, reflecting the fire from the wall torches. But learning is not enough, she continued. Can you lead? Darren raised an eyebrow. Lead what? He asked. Her smile widened as if she'd been waiting for that question. My elite guard needs a commander, she said. They follow strength, not blood. If you can earn their respect, you will command them. Darren's heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. And if I fail? She leaned in and whispered, then they'll kill you before I give the order. The next day he stood before the Queen's elite guard. 12 warriors, each taller and stronger than him, lined up in the sand-covered arena. They looked at him like he was meat. Unworthy. Unwelcome. Darren stepped forward and met their gaze. He spoke no words. Instead, he grabbed a practice spear and walked to the center. Come at me, he said calmly. The first warrior stepped in without hesitation. Darren sidestepped his strike and brought the butt of the spear hard into his gut. The warrior dropped. Another charged in, swinging fast. Darren ducked and tripped him. Dust flew into the air. The third came at him from behind, but Darren rolled and brought his elbow to the attacker's neck. The crowd gasped. The Queen stood silently above, watching. By the end of the trial, Darren stood alone. The guards lay groaning around him. His body was bruised and bleeding, but he hadn't fallen. He dropped the spear and looked up at the Queen. Without saying a word, Saraxa stepped into the arena herself. The warriors moved aside without question. She approached him slowly. Her eyes searched his face, reading every detail. Then she raised his hand and spoke to all. This human commands now. By blood and will, he has earned it. Cheers followed, but they were mixed with shock. The Queen had never allowed an outsider to rise so quickly, and never a human. But tradition was law. The warriors obeyed strength, and Darren had shown his. That night, she called him to her private chambers again. This time there was no throne. Just 2 cups of glowing wine, a soft couch, and silence. You bleed for my empire, she said, yet you do not belong to it. Why? Darren met her gaze and answered plainly, because I do not kneel to anyone. The Queen stared at him for a long moment, then she smiled. Darren had become a symbol of something new inside the empire. He was human, but the elite guard now followed his orders. Servants bowed with more respect. Even the older generals watched him carefully in the halls. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was rising. Queen Syraxa invited him more often to stand beside her during councils. He listened while nobles argued over territory and rebellions. He didn't speak unless asked, but when he did, his words cut through the noise like steel. Even her oldest advisor once nodded at his judgment. That night, while the queen walked through the gardens with him, she asked, "Do you miss Earth?" Darren paused before replying. "I miss the sky," he said. "The stars look different here, and the silence feels heavier." She looked up at the twin moons and nodded. "Zarion was never meant to be peaceful," she replied. "But sometimes I wonder what peace would feel like." Darren glanced at her face. It was softer in the moonlight, less like a queen, more like a woman, searching for something she had never held. The moment passed quickly. She stepped forward and returned to her usual voice. "Tomorrow we ride to the outer borders. A rebellion brews there. I want them to see you at my side. Let them fear you before they fight." Darren simply nodded. The next day, they boarded a hovercraft shaped like a beast of war. Its surface shimmered with runes and black plating. Darren stood in armor made for him by the Queen's blacksmith. It bore her symbol on the chest, glowing faintly with power. He felt its weight with every breath. The trip was short, but silent. Neither spoke during the flight. When they landed, a group of Zalari rebels had already gathered in the dust fields. They stood armed, angry, and loud. But they hesitated when they saw the human step out beside the queen. One of the rebel leaders shouted insults at Syraxa. He called her weak for letting a human walk beside her. Darren stepped forward before she could answer. He stared at the rebel and spoke calmly. "You speak loud because you are afraid of silence. You fear her because she didn't break me. What do you think she'll do to you?" The field went quiet. The rebel leader tried to laugh, but no one joined him. The others stepped back slowly. Fear had already taken root. They saw a human not as prey, but as a predator raised inside their queen's fire. The rebels surrendered that day without a single strike. Darren's presence had done what armies failed to do. Syraxa watched it all unfold with narrowed eyes. This was power she didn't expect. Power she couldn't control. On the way back, she asked him quietly, "Are you becoming one of us? Or are you changing us instead?" Darren didn't answer. He only looked at her, and she saw something that made her chest tighten. That night, Syraxa dismissed her guards and called Darren to her private quarters once again. This time she wore no crown. She wore no armor, only a simple robe, light as air. Yet her presence remained strong. She poured him a drink and handed it to him without a word. They sat across from each other in silence. No orders, no politics, just two warriors who had survived too much. After a long pause, she whispered, "You were meant to be my weakness, but I wonder if you've become my balance instead." Darren leaned back and spoke softly. "Maybe we're both wrong about who owns who now." The empire began to change as whispers spread. A human had walked into the queen's court as a prisoner and now stood beside her in matters of war and peace. Some called it weakness, others called it evolution, but none could deny his growing presence. Darren continued to train with the elite guard. He showed them techniques from Earth, methods of combat, discipline, and coordination. The guards respected him now, not only because the queen said so, but because he earned it in the blood-stained arena. One day, the royal engineers brought him a gift. A sword forged from alien steel and human design. It had the strength of Zalari metal and the balance of Earth craftsmanship. He held it in his hands and felt the fusion of two worlds. Queen Syraxa watched him from the balcony as he trained. Her face was unreadable. She had built an empire with fear and strength, but Darren's way was different. He won loyalty without breaking spirits. It unsettled her, and yet it pulled her closer. She summoned him that night to a high tower garden, where moonlight touched the silver leaves. "You're changing more than my soldiers," she said quietly. "You're changing me." Darren looked at her and waited. She rarely spoke from the heart. I ruled alone for decades, she continued. No partner, no counsel I trusted. Now I find myself listening to a man from a distant planet who was meant to kneel before me. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't turn away. Darren stepped closer, his expression calm. You didn't want a servant, he said. You wanted someone who could stand with you, maybe even against you. Her lips curved into a soft smile, and now I don't know whether to thank you or fear you. Days later, an envoy from a rival world arrived. They requested a formal audience with Queen Syraxa. Darren stood at her side as the visitors entered the hall. Their leader, General Vakar, was a harsh-looking figure with eyes like stone. He bowed to Syraxa but stared at Darren. A human, Vakar said aloud. Is this what you call strength now? Syraxa remained silent. Darren stepped forward. Would you like a demonstration? Vakar chuckled, then stepped back. The challenge was clear, but the queen raised her hand and ended it with a look. Later that evening, Syraxa met Darren privately. She poured 2 drinks and handed him one. You didn't need to speak, she said. Your silence alone rattled him. Darren sipped the drink and replied, Sometimes silence is louder than war. The queen leaned against the railing, staring at the twin moons. What would you do if I offered you more than this palace? She asked. Darren raised an eyebrow. Like, what? She turned to him and said, Everything, my throne, my empire, but not as a ruler alone, as my equal. For a long time he didn't answer. The weight of her words was heavier than any sword. He had come here as a prisoner. Now she spoke to him as if he was her future. He walked closer until only a breath separated them. You don't need a ruler beside you, he said. You need someone who tells you the truth even when it cuts. If you want that, I'll stay. But never as a shadow. She looked into his eyes and whispered, Then stay and cast your own light. Tensions across the galaxy were rising. The alliance between Earth and the Zalari Empire had shifted more than battle lines. It had reshaped politics, fear, and expectations. Not everyone supported what Queen Syraxa and Darren were becoming. Old enemies began to gather in the shadows. Whispers spread of a council forming against the queen. They feared the human influence, feared what change might come if peace replaced power. Syraxa knew war was near again, but this time it was not on the battlefield. It started with an assassination attempt. A silent blade aimed at Darren's throat during a formal banquet. He caught the attacker's wrist mid-strike and flipped him over the table before guards arrived. The court gasped, but Darren stood calm with the weapon in his hand. Syraxa, ordered, the traitor questioned. Under pressure, he confessed. He was sent by a group of nobles who believed the queen had grown soft, that Darren had poisoned her rule. The confession didn't anger her. It made her smile. I must be changing if they fear me more now than before, she said later that night. Darren stood beside her, quiet. His presence was no longer strange in her private chambers. It was expected, like a shield she chose to wear. I was meant to rule alone forever, she added. But now I find myself thinking of a future I never imagined, a future where I am not above but beside someone. Darren looked into her eyes, seeing the truth behind her words. He stepped forward and placed the blade from earlier onto her table. Then we must survive this war together, he said, not with fear but with clarity. They strike because they see a weakness. Show them it was a mistake. The following days were tense. Trials were held. Nobles who stood against her were removed from their posts. Darren led the investigations. He gave no speeches. He made no threats. He let his silence and eyes do the work, and it was enough. Meanwhile, Syraxa prepared the empire for another shift. She called her commanders to the central hall. Before them, all she declared Darren not just her champion, but her chosen consort. Gasps echoed across the room. No human had ever held such a title in Zalari history. Some bowed without question. Others hesitated, but none dared oppose her directly. The queen's voice was firm, her gaze sharp, and beside her stood the man who had once been a slave, now dressed in royal armor, marked by honor and blood. After the announcement, Saraxa turned to Darren privately. Her expression was softer, less guarded. You stood beside me in silence. You fought without promise. You questioned me when others only obeyed. This is not a reward. It is recognition, Darren replied with the same steady calm he always carried. Then let's see if your empire can handle us together. She smiled and took his hand, not as a ruler claiming property, but as a woman making a choice. In the days that followed, celebrations spread across the capital. Some welcomed the union, others watched with hidden eyes, but the people felt the shift. The air was different. The throne was shared now, not by force, but by will. Darren stood at the balcony during one of the ceremonies, looking out over the city. Fireworks painted the sky with alien colors. He didn't smile, but his eyes were alive. Saraxa joined him, her arm slipping around his waist. Do you regret being captured that day? She asked. Not for a second, he said. The throne room was brighter than ever before. Twin moons shone through the high crystal windows, casting silver light across the stone floor. Darren stood beside Saraxa, both wearing ceremonial armor lined with glowing threads. It was the day the Empire would officially recognize them as one. Nobles filled the chamber, heads bowed. The elite guard stood in perfect silence. A new banner had been raised, one that showed two symbols woven into one. The Zalari crest and the mark of Earth united as a single force. For many, it was the start of a new age. Saraxa addressed the court with steady voice and sharp words. She spoke not of domination, but of unity, not of chains, but of choice. Her eyes burned with the fire of a ruler, but her tone held the grace of a leader who had evolved. When she finished, she turned to Darren and extended her hand. He took it without pause. In front of the entire court, she placed a crown, not of gold, but of obsidian and crystal upon his head. There were no loud cheers, only a deep collective silence filled with awe. Later that night, the two sat alone, in the highest tower. The wind moved softly around them. Saraxa removed her crown and placed it on the stone beside her. The Empire will expect a future, she said. Not just power, legacy, a path beyond us. Darren nodded. I never asked for this, he said. But now that it's mine, I will protect it. Not with fear, with truth. With strength earned, not stolen. Saraxa looked at him, pride softening her gaze. She had never imagined those words would comfort her. Far beyond the stars, other empires watched with wary eyes. Messages were sent. Proposals were offered. Enemies hesitated. Peace was not yet certain, but something stronger than fear had begun to take root. Respect was growing. In the months that followed, Darren led missions to former war zones. He spoke, not as a conqueror, but as a symbol of change. Soldiers who once spat at Earth's name now raised their weapons in salute. Where he walked, tension fell away. Saraxa remained the fire behind the Empire. She ruled with precision and steel. But her coldness had melted. Her people saw her laugh. They saw her listen. And they saw her trust. That trust had a name, and that name was Darren. One day, deep in the central garden, Saraxa stood barefoot, in the grass. Darren approached and saw something in her he had not seen before. Peace. Not weakness. True peace. She turned and smiled. Do you still feel like a prisoner? She asked. No, he said. I feel like I chose this fate. And I'd choose it again. She stepped forward and took his hands. Then build it with me. Not just rule it. Shape it. Give them more than we ever had. He nodded once. No vows were spoken. None were needed. Years passed. Songs were written. Statues were carved. Children were told of the human who became more than a slave. who stood beside a queen and made her stronger, who faced a galaxy and did not kneel. In time, they became legend. But to each other, they remained exactly what they were from the start. Two warriors who refused to be owned,